There is a sound you have made thousands of times without ever hearing it. It happens in the half second before you fall asleep, in the pause between one thought and the next, in the silence that sits underneath every word you have ever spoken. Tonight we are going to walk into that silence on purpose. We are going to take the oldest, smallest, most misunderstood syllable ever written down, and we are going to open it like a locked room. You have seen the symbol. It is on jewelry, on the walls of yoga studios, printed on cheap cotton, tattooed on the shoulders of people who could not tell you what it means. 3 curves, a small crescent, a single dot. Most people treat it as decoration. Here is what most people miss. That little glyph is not decoration. It is a diagram. Long before there were brain scanners, someone drew a precise map of the 4 rooms your mind lives in and hid it inside a single mark on a page. By the end of this, you will know why the sages who wrote it believed that this one syllable contained the entire universe. You will know why they said that if you understood only this and nothing else, you would need nothing else. You will know why the shortest sacred text in India, just 12 sentences long, spends every one of those sentences on this single sound. And you will know something stranger. You will know why waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep are not 3 unrelated experiences, but 3 doorways in the same house, and why the door you almost never notice is the one you fall through every single night. We will move slowly. We will follow one thread from the beginning of the world to the inside of your own skull. We will meet a philosopher who said the only instruction you truly need is to repeat one word. We will stand at the exact place where the idea of a self dissolves, and we will ask the uncomfortable question that no one printing this symbol on a coffee mug wants to ask. If the self is an illusion, what happens to right and wrong? Where does good go when the one who was supposed to be good disappears? Stay until the end. The last thing I want to tell you is the thing everything else is pointing toward, and without it, the rest is just beautiful noise. Before we begin, a word about how to use this. This is made for slowness, for thinking with your eyes closed. It is made to be listened to in the dark, at the edge of sleep, and if you drift off somewhere in the middle, that is allowed. The old teachers believed that certain ideas are best absorbed sideways, while the loud front of the mind is finally quiet. So let it play. Let the paradoxes settle into you while you rest. Some of this will be understood by the part of you that is still awake, and some of it by the part of you that is already dreaming. So let your body get heavy. Let your thoughts slow down. Let the words wash over you like water. There is nothing here you need to hold on to, nothing you need to memorize, nothing you have to keep up with. Let your eyes close, if they have not closed already. Feel the weight of your head where it rests, and notice how the surface underneath you is doing all the work of holding you now, so that your muscles can quietly hand over the job. Breathe out, slowly, and let the out-breath be longer than the in-breath. And let the shoulders come down a little further than you thought they could. You may begin to notice a warmth somewhere at the top of your head, a soft heaviness gathering at the crown and beginning, in its own time, to spread down through the forehead and the small muscles around the eyes, which can soften now and let go of a whole day of looking. Down through the jaw, which is allowed to be loose, down through the throat and the shoulders and the arms, until the hands feel warm and heavy and far away. And deeper still, through the chest, the belly rising and falling on its own, the legs growing pleasantly heavy, all the way to the feet. You do not have to do any of this. You only have to allow it. The way you allow sleep, which never comes when you chase it, and always comes when you stop. And as the body settles, the mind can drift and follow the sound of my voice, and it does not matter at all whether you follow every word. Some part of you will listen. That part never sleeps. So let the rest of you sink. If any of this gives you something, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It is a small thing, and it decides whether these long quiet nights get made at all. My words are nothing without those who say thank you for them. And one request: we are always looking for the next thing to explore. If there is a school or a country of thought that pulls at you, American, Indian, European, Russian, British, German, or some corner of psychology you have always wanted opened slowly in the dark, leave a short comment with the name of it. That is how the next door gets chosen. Now, let us begin with a sound. Imagine for a moment a time before anything, not before the earth, not before the sun, before all of it. No matter, no light, no space for light to cross. And now imagine that the very first thing to exist was not a thing at all, but a vibration, a hum with nothing yet to hum through. This is where the oldest thinkers of India begin, and it is a strange and beautiful place to begin, because they did not say the universe started with an object. They said it started with a sound. They gave that sound a name, Om, sometimes written Aum. They called it the Pranava, which comes from roots meaning the primal, the ever-new, the sound that is always beginning. And they made a claim so large it is easy to walk past it. They said this sound is not a symbol for the universe. They said it is the universe, in the way that the ripple is the water and not a picture of the water. Everything you can see, everything you cannot, the past, the thing that is happening to you right now, and whatever waits beyond time entirely, all of it, they said, is this one syllable. Let that sink in, not a prayer to the source of things, the source of things, wearing sound as its first clothing. There is a phrase for this idea that has echoed through Indian thought for thousands of years. Nada Brahman. The universe is vibration. The teaching is that reality, at its root, is not stone or particle but resonance, and that the deeper you go into anything at all, the more it stops behaving like a solid object and starts behaving like a note being held. It is an ancient intuition, and here is the part they don't tell you when they hand you the pretty version. Modern physics, in its own cold language, arrived somewhere unnervingly close. Reach far enough down past the atom, past the particle, and the most fundamental descriptions we have stop talking about tiny balls of stuff and start talking about fields that vibrate, oscillations, frequencies. The ancient poet said the world is made of a held note. The physicist, reluctantly, in equations, does not entirely disagree. Everything in the world has its own song. The old cultures believed this literally. A river has one, a fire has one, a person has one, and if you could go quiet enough to hear the note underneath all the separate notes, you would be hearing the one sound they were all variations of. Om was their name for that one sound, the tone that everything else is a chord inside of. Now, why does any of this matter to you, lying here in the dark? Because the claim is not only cosmic, it is personal, and it is practical. The teaching is that this same primal vibration is not out there in some distant heaven. It is running through you. It is closer to you than your own heartbeat, and the reason you have never noticed it is the same reason a fish does not notice water. You are made of the thing you are looking for, and you can begin to notice this now, without effort, without moving at all. Let your breathing find its own slow rhythm, and simply listen. Not to me. Underneath me, listen to the quiet that my voice is happening inside of. The quiet that was in the room before I began speaking, and that will still be here when I stop. Perhaps you can hear the room. Perhaps you can hear your own breath, the small sound of the air as it leaves you. And underneath even that, there is a stillness, patient, unhurried, that has been waiting all day for you to notice it. As you listen to that stillness, you may find that the body gets a little heavier, the way it does just before sleep, when the limbs stop belonging to you quite so definitely and begin to feel warm and pleasantly distant and difficult to move, and there is no reason at all to move them. Let that heaviness deepen with every out-breath, And with every out-breath, let another layer of the day slide off and sink and settle. So the first practice, the one you can do tonight without moving, is only this. Stop adding sound for a moment and start listening for the sound that was already there. Not silence as an absence, but silence as a presence you have been talking over your whole life. The teachers were blunt about how hard this is. To hear yourself, you need days of silence. You cannot do it in the gaps between notifications. But you can begin. You can begin by suspecting, just suspecting, that underneath the noise of your day there has been a single continuous tone, and that you have simply never turned toward it. That suspicion is the doorway, and now that we are standing in front of it, we have to look at the sound itself, because Om is not one sound. It only pretends to be. It is three sounds hiding a fourth, and the fourth is the one that changes everything. Say it slowly and honestly, and you will find that Om is not a single note. It is a journey. It begins deep in the body as an open A, the mouth wide, the sound rising from somewhere near the belly. It rounds forward into U, the lips gathering, the sound moving up through the chest. It closes into M, the lips sealed, the sound humming in the skull and the bones of the face until it fades. A, then U, then M. Om. Three distinct movements that most people blur into one lazy syllable. You do not have to make the sound out loud to feel where it lives. You can let it happen inside, silently, while you lie there. Imagine the A, low and open, somewhere in the belly, a slow warm spreading as though something loosened at the very center of you. Then let it round upward into the U, warm through the chest, and feel the chest soften, and the breath grows slower and deeper without you deciding to make it so. And then the M, the closing hum, rising into the throat, the face, the top of the skull, a gentle vibration under the bones, as though warmth were pooling at the crown, and then beginning to pour back down through you, heavy and slow, like warm water finding its way down the shoulders, the arms, the hands, the legs, until every part of you it passes through gets a little softer, a little heavier, a little further away. And then the silence. Let the silence be the place you rest. There is nothing to do in it, and nothing to reach for. And if your thoughts drift somewhere else entirely, that is fine. They can drift, and you can drift with them, deeper. The sages did not consider this an accident of pronunciation. They considered it the whole teaching, encoded in the mouth. Three sounds, they said, for three worlds. Three sounds for the three great phases of everything that exists. A is creation, the mouth opening, the beginning. U is preservation, the sound sustained, held, kept alive. M is dissolution, the closing, the fade, the return to silence, beginning, middle, end, birth, life, death. In one breath, you have pronounced the entire arc of anything that has ever existed, and then, quietly, you have let it dissolve. But here is where it becomes something more than poetry. Because the same three sounds, the sages said, are not only the three phases of the cosmos, they are the three states of you. Not metaphorically, literally. The three conditions your consciousness passes through every 24 hours of your life. A is your waking, U is your dreaming, M is your deep and dreamless sleep. You do not have to travel to a mountain to experience the structure of reality. You fall through all three of its floors every night, in your own bed, for free. This is the genius of the text we are about to lean on, and it deserves to be named the Mandukya Upanishad. It is the shortest of the principal Upanishads, only 12 short verses, that is all, 12 sentences. And yet the great commentators of the tradition, Gaudapada, who wrote the earliest surviving commentary on it, and Adi Shankara after him, held that this one tiny text was enough on its own. That if a person understood these 12 lines completely, they would need no other scripture to reach liberation. 12 sentences considered sufficient to free a human being. There is nothing else quite like that claim in the literature of the world. And what do those 12 sentences do? They take the one thing every human being already has in common, the daily fall from waking into dream into deep sleep, and they show that this ordinary cycle is a secret staircase. Each state, they say, is a floor of your own being, and the sound Om is the banister that runs the length of the stairs. But 3 floors is not the whole house. Listen carefully, because this is the hinge the entire thing turns on. After you say A, and U, and M, after the humming in your skull finally fades, there is a silence, a gap before the next breath, and the sages said that this silence is not nothing. This silence is the 4th. It is the state that has no letter, because it cannot be made into a sound. 3 sounds you can pronounce and then 1 presence you can only fall into. They called it Turiya, which means plainly the 4th, and they said it is the real you, not the one who wakes, not the one who dreams, not the one who sleeps, but the silent one who is present through all 3 and belongs to none of them. Here is the part they don't tell you. The most important part of the most sacred sound in India is the part where the sound stops. The syllable is a container for its own silence. You chant so that you can arrive at the quiet on the far side of the chant. We will get to that silence. But you cannot appreciate the 4th room until you have walked carefully through the first 3. So let us go down into them, one at a time, beginning with the only one you think you understand. The waking world. The place you are so sure is real. That certainty is the first thing the teaching is going to take apart. Start where you are the most confident. The waking world. Right now you believe you are a body in a room, surrounded by solid objects, receiving a steady stream of reliable information through your senses. This is the state the tradition calls Jagrat, the waking, and it maps to the first sound of Om, the open A, the beginning, the mouth thrown wide to the outside world. In the Mandukya Upanishad, this waking self is given a name. Vaishvanara, the one who faces outward, the self whose attention is turned toward the external, who knows the world through the senses and acts upon it with the body. This is the you that pays bills, that argues, that wants things, that is reading this or hearing this right now, and thinks of that as the baseline, the ordinary, the real. Waking is treated as the default. It feels like the ground floor of existence. And here the teaching does something quietly radical. It refuses to give waking any special status. Waking, it says, is a state, one state among several. It is not the truth against which the others are measured. It is simply the room your attention happens to be standing in during the day. The waking world is intensely convincing, and the sages knew exactly why. When you are in it, it is all there is. You cannot see past its walls from the inside. Every state does this. Every state, while you are in it, presents itself as complete and final and obviously real. You already have proof of this, and you experience the proof every night. Think of a dream. While you are dreaming, the dream is not a dream to you. It is the world. You accept its impossible logic without a flicker of doubt. You meet the dead and are not surprised. You are somewhere you have never been, and you know it completely. The dream from the inside is as solid and self-evident as this room is to you now. And then you wake, and the whole convincing universe you were just living in collapses into nothing. And you say, "Oh, it was only a dream." Now hold that experience and turn it around. Slowly, the way the sages ask you to. If the dream felt completely real while you were inside it, and turned out to be a passing state of your own mind, then what exactly is your guarantee that this, the waking world, is not also a state? Convincing from the inside, complete from the inside, and no more final than the dream was. This is not a trick. This is the crack the whole teaching enters through. The waking world proves its own case too well. Its total certainty is exactly what the dream had, right up until the moment it ended. And you can feel the truth of this tonight, in your own body, because right now the waking state is already beginning to loosen its grip on you. Notice it. The room is still there, and it matters a little less than it did 10 minutes ago. The plans, the unfinished conversations, the things you were going to worry about, they are all still there too. And somehow they have moved further off, the way the shore moves off from a boat that has quietly slipped its rope. The waking world is letting go of you, gently, without asking your permission, exactly as it does every night of your life. So you can let it. There is nothing you need to be awake for. The eyes are heavy, and they can stay closed. The body is heavy, and it can stay exactly where it is. And with each breath out, the waking state can grow a little thinner, a little more transparent, until it is only one room among several, and the door to the next one is already standing open. The practical instruction here is not to stop trusting your life. You still have to cross the street safely. The instruction is subtler and more useful than that. It is to loosen your grip on the assumption that waking is the one true condition, and everything else is a lesser shadow of it. The moment you hold waking as a state, rather than as the ground of all reality, something changes in how you move through your day. You become, very slightly, the witness of your waking, rather than its prisoner. You notice that you are the one to whom the waking world is appearing, and that noticing is the first taste of the fourth thing we are moving toward. There is an old line that fits here. Life flows from within outward. Follow this thought, and you will become truth itself. The waking self believes the current runs the other way, that the world outside pours into you and makes you what you are. The teaching insists the reverse. That awareness comes first, and the world it lights up comes second. The way a room does not create the lamp, but the lamp reveals the room. So the first room of the House of Om is the one you were most sure of, and it turns out to be the one built on the shakiest ground, held up entirely by a certainty that a single dream can knock over. Speaking of which, we have to go there now. We have to go behind your own closed eyes, into the state where you are the author, the actor, and the entire set at once, and ask what it means that you build a whole world every night and forget you did it by morning. Tonight, a few hours from now, you will do something that should astonish you far more than it does. You will close your eyes, your body will go still, and out of nothing, you will conjure an entire universe. People will speak to you, and you will not know in advance what they are going to say, even though you are the one saying it. Places will assemble themselves in perfect detail. You will feel fear, joy, grief, desire, all of it as sharp as anything you feel awake. And every scrap of it will be made of nothing but your own mind, lit from the inside. This is the second state, Svapna, the dream. It maps to the middle sound of Om, the U, the sound that has left the wide openness of A and turned inward, gathering, subtle, held between the beginning and the end. And the self who lives in this state gets its own name in the text. Taijasa, the shining one, the luminous one, because in the dream you no longer need the outside world to see. You have become your own light source. You generate the seen and the seer from a single glow behind the eyes. And perhaps it is already beginning, because as you lie here listening, the mind has been quietly doing what it always does at this hour. Somewhere behind your closed eyes, images have started to arrive on their own. A face, a place you half remember, a fragment of something that makes no sense and does not need to. You are not making these. They are simply appearing, the way they appear every night, in that soft borderland where the thinking mind loosens its hands and lets the deeper mind speak. You can let them come. There is no need to hold on to any of them, and no need to push any of them away. Let the images drift past like leaves on slow water, and let yourself sink beneath them, warm, heavy, safe, held. My voice can continue, and you can follow it, or you can leave it behind and follow the images instead. Both are allowed. Both are the same doorway, and whichever way you go from here, you will be going where this whole night has been leading you. Consider what the dream actually demonstrates, because it is easy to dismiss, and it is not small. It proves that your mind can produce a complete, convincing, sensory world with no external input whatsoever. No light entering the eyes, and yet you see. No sound reaching the ears, and yet you hear voices. The raw material of the dream world is memory, impression, fear, longing. The residue of everything you have taken in while awake, recombined into something new. The old texts said this exactly. In the dream state, the self experiences a world made of its own impressions. You are not receiving reality here. You are secreting it. And this is where the teaching turns the knife, gently. If you can build a whole world at night out of your own impressions and mistake it completely for reality, what is the mind doing during the day? The unsettling suggestion running through this tradition is that waking perception is not the clean recording you imagine it to be. That even awake, you are not seeing the world as it is. You are seeing your version of it, assembled from memory and expectation and desire, a construction so seamless, you never catch it being built. The dream, in this reading, is not the opposite of waking. The dream is waking with the training wheels off, the mind doing openly at night what it does secretly by day. There is a practical gift buried in this, and it is one of the most useful things in the whole teaching. The dream shows you, undeniably, that you are the one generating your experience of things. Not entirely, not omnipotently. You cannot dream your rent away. But the emotional texture of your world, the meaning you lay over events, the story you tell about what is happening to you, that is far more like the dream than you admit. Two people stand in the same room, in the same waking world, and live in two completely different realities, because each is dreaming a different meaning over the same set of facts. Once you see that, you get a strange freedom. If you are the author of the layer of meaning, then the layer of meaning can be revised. The event is fixed. The dream you wrap around the event is not. This is not positive thinking. It is something older and colder and more honest. It is the recognition that a great deal of your suffering is not in the event itself, but in the world you dream over it, and that the dreamer can, with enormous practice, learn to dream differently. But the dream is still a world of images, still a world of a seer and a thing seen, of you and the not you, of shapes and stories. It is quieter and stranger than waking, but it is still full. To find the real silence, we have to go somewhere with no images at all. Somewhere you go every night and never remember, because there is, in a sense, no one there to remember it. We have to go into dreamless sleep. The room with no pictures. And it is here, in the state you think of as simple unconsciousness, that the teaching finds its most shocking clue. Every night you enter a country and come back with no photographs. Dreamless sleep. Not the dreaming, but the deep, silent, imageless sleep beneath even that. You were there for hours. You have been there thousands of times. And you can remember exactly nothing of it. Not because nothing happened, but because in that state, the whole machinery of remembering, the whole apparatus of you as a separate someone taking notes, was switched off. This is the third state, Sushupti, deep sleep, matched to the final sound of Om, the M, the closing hum, the sound sealing shut, fading into the skull, returning toward silence. And the self of this state has a name too, Prajna. And here is the first surprise the text hands us. It does not describe deep sleep as an emptiness, a mere off switch, a nothing. It describes it as a state of undivided peace, a condition where the endless division of the mind, the ceaseless splitting of the world into this and that, subject and object, want and fear, finally stops. In deep sleep, the tradition says, you are not tormented by desire, because there is no separate you left standing apart from things to desire them. For a few hours, the war is over. And now, ask yourself the question that the sages built their entire system around. Why do you wake from deep, dreamless sleep feeling restored? Not from the dreaming, which can leave you rattled. From the deep, imageless sleep. You come back from it, and something in you is repaired, refreshed, made new. And you cannot say what happened there because nothing happened there that could be turned into a memory. This reveals something profound. You returned rested from a place you cannot remember, which means you touched something good in a state where your ordinary self, the one who remembers, was completely absent. Sit with that, because it is the crack the light comes through. The peace of deep sleep does not depend on your personality being present. In fact, it arrives precisely when your personality is gone. Every night you dip into a well of rest that has nothing to do with your name, your history, your worries, your identity, and you come up cleaner. The teaching draws the obvious and staggering conclusion. There is something in you that is peaceful by nature, underneath the self that suffers, and you visit it every single night without knowing, but there is a limitation, and the sages were rigorous about it. The peace of deep sleep is real, but it is unconscious. You do not know it while you are in it. You get the benefit and miss the meaning. You go into the treasure room every night blindfolded, fill your pockets, and remember nothing. The whole aim of the deeper practice, the thing meditation is actually for, is not to invent a new state. It is to enter that same silent peace of deep sleep while remaining aware, to carry a lamp into the room that is usually dark, to be consciously present in the very stillness you normally only visit while unconscious. That is the bridge. Deep sleep shows you that a peace beyond the self exists. Meditation is the attempt to walk into that peace with your eyes open, and the moment you do, the moment there is awareness in that stillness, you are no longer in deep sleep at all. You have stepped through into the fourth thing, the one with no letter, the silence after the M. There is a practical instruction even here, in the one state you cannot control. It is this: learn to trust the peace you return with. Most people wake and immediately grab back their worries, snatching up the whole heavy bag of the self before their feet even hit the floor. Try, tomorrow, to lie still for 30 seconds before the grabbing begins. In that gap, some residue of the imageless peace is still on you. That residue is not nothing. It is your nightly proof that you are more than the anxious self that reassembles itself every morning. Feel it before you pick the self back up. And now we stand at the door of the fourth, the one that has no sound, no image, no name. We have walked through waking, through dreaming, through dreamless sleep. There is one room left, and it is the room the entire syllable was built to point at. Let us go into the silence. There are 3 sounds in Om, and then there is what comes after. The silence when the humming stops. For most of your life you have treated that silence as the mere end of the sound, the way the end of a song is just the absence of the song. The sages treated it as the point of the entire exercise. They said the 3 sounds exist to deliver you to the silence, the way a road exists to deliver you to a place. The road is not the destination, neither is the sound. They called this fourth state Turiya, and the word is almost aggressively plain. It just means the fourth. They refuse to give it a poetic name, and the refusal is the teaching, because the fourth cannot be described in the terms of the other 3. It is not waking, though it is aware. It is not dreaming, though it is vivid. It is not deep sleep, though it is utterly at peace. The Mandukya Upanishad, when it finally reaches the fourth, does something the rest of the text does not do. It stops asserting and starts subtracting. The fourth, it says, is not the knower of the external, not the knower of the internal, not a mass of knowing, not unknowing, unseen, beyond dealings, ungraspable, without marks, beyond thought, beyond name. Why speak only in negatives? Because every positive word you could reach for belongs to one of the three lower rooms, and would drag the fourth back down into them. To say it is bright borrows from waking. To say it is blissful borrows from sleep. So the text points by removing, chipping away everything the fourth is not, until what is left is a shape made entirely of absences, and you are supposed to fall through the gap in the middle. This is why it has no letter in the syllable. A, U, and M are three things you can make. Turiya is the one thing you cannot make, only uncover, by letting the three fall silent. And what is it, this fourth, once all the negations are done? The tradition answers with the most radical claim it possesses. It is you. Not the you that has a name and a history and a face in the mirror, the bare fact of awareness itself, the silent witness that was present in waking, present in dreaming, present in deep sleep, unchanged through all of them, and belonging to none. They called it Atman, the true self, and then they said the thing that got people to sit up for 3,000 years. That this innermost awareness in you, the fourth, the silent witness, is not different from the innermost reality of the whole universe, which they called Brahman. Atman is Brahman. The awareness at the center of you and the ground of all existence are one and the same, and the entire staircase of Om was built to walk you to the place where you could see it. Let that land slowly. The claim is not that you contain a spark of the divine, like a coal in a stove. The claim is that the awareness reading these words, once stripped of everything that changes, is identical to the awareness underlying the cosmos, and that they were never two things that got joined. They were one thing that only appeared to be many, the way one moon appears broken into 1,000 pieces on the surface of a rippled lake. Here is the practice, and it is the whole practice in one sentence. Turn the attention around. All day, every day, your awareness points outward, at objects, at thoughts, at feelings, at other people, at the endless parade of things that are not you. Turiya is what you find when you turn the light back on the one holding it, not another object to look at, the looker, the seer that cannot be seen because it is the one doing all the seeing. You will never find it as a thing because it is the finder. You uncover it only by growing quiet enough that the objects thin out and, for a moment, there is only the bare awareness, aware of itself, needing nothing. They were honest about the price. This kind of quiet is not a thing that reveals itself in a spare 5 minutes between tasks. But the direction is available to you this instant. Ask right now who is aware of the thoughts passing through. And notice that you cannot turn around fast enough to catch the one who is asking. That failure, that impossibility of ever objectifying the witness, is not a dead end. It is the door. The seer stays forever just behind your looking. And that is exactly how you know it is real. So we have the 4. 3 sounds and a silence. Waking, dreaming, sleeping, and the witness of all 3. And now, having heard the map described, you are finally ready to see it drawn. Because someone, long ago, took this entire teaching and folded it into a single mark you could carry on a page. 3 curves, a crescent, and a dot. It is time to learn to read the symbol itself, because once you can, you will never see it as decoration again. Look at the symbol. Really look. The way you would look at a face you were about to have to recognize in a crowd. EOM. There is a large curve at the bottom. A curve above it, reaching out to the right, a third curve rising off the top, a crescent, like a small cup or a piece of a moon, and floating above the crescent, alone, a single dot, 5 parts, And here is the part they don't tell you when they sell it to you on a keychain. Every one of those 5 parts is one of the things we have just walked through. The glyph is not art. It is the map of consciousness, drawn. Begin with the large lower curve. That is waking. Jagrat, the state we spend our days in. And so it is drawn the biggest, the most expansive, the loudest part of the figure. Because waking consciousness feels dominant. Feels like all of life. Feels like everything. It is given the most space on the page for the same reason it takes up the most space in your sense of who you are. The middle curve, reaching out from the center, is the dream, svapna. It sits between the waking curve and the one above, exactly as the dream sits between outward waking and inward deep sleep, a threshold world, half in and half out. The upper curve is deep sleep, sushupti, drawn higher, subtler, because it is the most withdrawn of the 3 ordinary states, the furthest from the outer world of the senses. So already in 3 lines, the artist has drawn your entire night. Waking, dreaming, deep sleep, stacked in a single flowing figure. But 3 curves is only the 3 sounds. Where is the 4th? Where is the silence? Look up. Above the 3 curves sits the dot. And the dot is Turiya, the 4th. Pure awareness, the silent witness, the true self. It is drawn as a single point, without size, because that which is beyond all the states cannot be given a shape or a measure. And notice where it sits. Apart, above, separate from the 3 curves, touching none of them. The way the witness is present in all 3 states, yet caught by none. And now the strangest and most honest part of the whole design. Between the 3 curves and the dot, there is a crescent, a small open cup, curving up as if to hold the dot, but not quite reaching it. That crescent has a name, and the name is the hinge of the entire spiritual drama. It is Maya, illusion, the veil. And look at what the drawing is telling you. The crescent sits between you, down in the 3 states of ordinary life, and the dot, the true self, floating just above. It is drawn as a barrier, a threshold, a thin curved wall separating the life you know from the awareness you are. Look closely, because this is drawn right into the shape itself. The dot is near. The true self is not far away in some distant heaven. It hovers just above your waking, your dreaming, your sleep, a hair's breadth off. And yet the crescent, the veil of illusion, sits between, so that ordinary consciousness looks up and does not see the dot at all, or mistakes the crescent for the ceiling of the world. The whole tragedy and the whole hope of the human condition, drawn in 2 shapes. The self is right there, and something thin and curved and almost transparent keeps you from crossing to it. Here is the practical use of this, and it is real. When you next see the symbol on a wall, on a pendant, do not let your eyes slide past it as decoration. Read it, bottom to top. This is my waking. This is my dreaming. This is my sleep. This is the veil. And that, the dot, apart and above, is what I actually am, watching all of it. Used this way, the symbol becomes a thing it was designed to be, and almost never gets to be anymore. A reminder, carried through an ordinary day, of the map of your own depths. But a map is not a country, and a symbol is only a pointer. Someone had to give people an actual instruction, a thing to do with the body and the breath, a technique. And around 2,000 years ago, one man compressed the entire method into an instruction so short, it fits in a single line. Repeat one word, he said, and contemplate its meaning. Let us go meet him, because that one line is doing far more than it appears to. Around 2,000 years ago, a figure we know as Patanjali gathered the scattered techniques of an ancient inner tradition and compressed them into a set of terse, diamond-hard aphorisms, the Yoga Sutras. They are famous for their brevity. Each line is a seed, packed to bursting, meant to be unfolded by a teacher across months. And in the middle of the first chapter, having spent several lines circling the idea of the supreme, the ground of all, the source, Patanjali does something practical. He tells you what to do about it, and what he says is almost comically simple. The word that expresses that supreme reality, he says, is the pranava, Om. And then the next line, the instruction, 4 words in the original. Repeat it and contemplate its meaning. That is the technique. Say the word. Dwell on what it points to. From that, the following line promises, comes the turning inward of consciousness and the falling away of the obstacles that block it. Now, why one word? Why not a long prayer, an elaborate ritual, a complicated visualization? Because the problem Patanjali is solving is the problem of the restless mind, and the restless mind cannot be calmed by giving it more to do. It can only be calmed by giving it one thing, endlessly, until it stops thrashing. The single repeated syllable is a stake driven into the ground for the wandering animal of attention. It has somewhere to return to. Every time the mind bolts, and it will bolt 1,000 times, there is the word, waiting, and you come back to it, not with force, just, again, the word. There is a subtlety here that the tradition guarded carefully, and it separates real practice from mechanical muttering. Patanjali does not say repeat the word. He says repeat it and contemplate its meaning. The repetition without the meaning is just noise. A parrot could do it. The point is that as you repeat the syllable, you hold underneath it an awareness of what it stands for, the whole map, the primal vibration, the source, the true self that the sound is a doorway to. The word is the handle. The meaning is the door it opens. Grip only the handle, and you spend your life polishing a doorknob attached to nothing. The commentators gave a beautiful image for the relationship between the word and what it means. They said, it is like a lamp and its light. You cannot separate them. Where there is the lamp of the sound, there is the light of the reality it expresses, arriving together, one inseparable from the other. So to say the word truly, with the meaning alive inside it, is to invite the reality itself into the room, not as a metaphor, but as a felt presence. And here the tradition makes a claim that is either wildly overstated or quietly enormous, depending on how you hold it. It says the relationship between Om and the reality it names is not a human convention, not an arbitrary label we could swap for another. It says the connection is intrinsic, permanent, like the connection between fire and heat. Other words for holy things are agreements. This word, they insist, is the actual sonic shape of the thing. The reason nearly every mantra in the tradition begins with it. The reason it is called the seed of all sound. You may believe that or not, but notice what it does to the practice. If the word is only a label, you are reciting a name. If the word is the thing wearing sound, you are handling the reality directly every time your mouth forms it. Life flows from within outward, and this is a technique built entirely on that principle. You are not reaching out to grab a distant god. You are sounding a single note that was already inside you, and letting it draw your scattered attention back down the well toward its own source. The genius is the economy of it. One word, repeated, meant. That is the whole engine. But we have been circling something beautiful and comforting for a while now, and honesty demands we walk straight into the shadow of it. Because this teaching, taken to its logical end, says that the separate self is an illusion, that the boundary between you and everything else is the crescent, the veil, not a real wall. And if that is true, a terrible question opens underneath it. If there is no separate self, if all of it is one, then what happens to good and evil? What happens to the person you were trying to be kind to, if they were never really other than you, and never really there at all? We have to go into that darkness now, because the people selling you this symbol will never take you there. Here is the question no one prints on a yoga mat. If the deepest teaching of Om is true, if the separate self is a veil, and all things are ultimately one awareness wearing a million masks, then where exactly does good and evil live? Because our entire moral life is built on separation. Kindness only means something if there is a you and an other, and you choose the other's good over your own convenience. Cruelty only means something if the person you harm is truly there, truly separate, truly capable of being wronged. Take away the separation, and the whole scaffolding of right and wrong seems to hang in empty air. This is not a made-up worry. It is the sharpest objection to non-dual philosophy, and serious minds have pressed it for centuries. If all is one, and the world of separate persons is Maya, illusion, then is the suffering of others also illusion. When someone is being crushed in front of you, does the enlightened one simply smile and say, "It is only the play of appearances. No one is really harmed"? There have been people who talked exactly like that, who used the highest teaching as a permission slip for the coldest indifference. If nothing is truly real, nothing truly matters, and I owe you nothing, because you were never really here. This is the abyss at the bottom of the beautiful idea, and any honest guide has to walk you to its edge. But stand at that edge and look carefully, because the tradition itself saw this cliff and built a fence. And the fence is this: the very same logic that dissolves the separateness of the other also dissolves the separateness of you. The teaching does not say, the other is unreal and you are real, so do as you please. It says, the deeper self in you is the very same self that is looking out through their eyes. Not similar, the same. And that changes the entire moral equation. If the awareness at the center of the person suffering in front of you is literally the same awareness at the center of you, then to harm them is not to harm a separate stranger, it is to harm yourself in another body. The wall between selfishness and compassion does not just weaken, it falls, and they turn out to have been the same thing all along, seen from two sides. This is the reading the great teachers actually held. Not that oneness abolishes ethics, but that oneness is the deepest possible foundation for ethics. You do not need to be commanded to love your neighbor if you have seen directly that your neighbor is yourself. Compassion stops being a rule imposed from outside and becomes simple accuracy. Cruelty is revealed as a kind of ignorance, a failure to see, a man cutting his own hand because he mistook it for someone else's. The saint and the monster are divided not by their beliefs about oneness, but by which half of the logic they let into their heart. One says, "You are unreal, so I am free of you." The other says, "You are myself, so I am bound to you more tightly than any law could bind me." An enemy is not always an enemy, and a friend is not always a friend. Underneath the roles, underneath the masks that the world assigns, there is the same awareness looking out. The person you have decided to hate is at the root, the identical silence that you are. This does not make the harm they did to you disappear. It makes it stranger and more tragic than simple villainy. And it takes from you the clean satisfaction of pure hatred, which is a loss you may not thank the teaching for. So where is good and where is evil? In a world that is secretly one. The real question is not whether morality survives the dissolving of the self. It is whether you will use the dissolving as an excuse or as a summons. The identical insight is a doorway that opens both ways. Through one side steps the cold man who owes nothing to phantoms. Through the other steps the one who cannot look away from any suffering, because it is all finally happening to the single awareness they now know themselves to be. The teaching hands you the key and refuses to tell you which door to open. That refusal is not a flaw in the teaching. It is the last freedom it leaves you, and the most dangerous. Keep that danger in mind, because we are about to see how this one syllable spread across the whole of the East into traditions that would seem to have nothing in common, and took root in each of them. The same sound, the same map, appearing in the mouths of monks and mystics who never met, and would have argued about everything else. Many roads, Let us see where they lead. Follow the sound outward from its origin and watch what happens. It refuses to stay in one religion. Om begins in the oldest layers of the Indian scriptures, and inside the Hindu tradition alone it takes a dozen forms. The three sounds become the three great powers: the one who creates, the one who preserves, the one who dissolves, so that to say the syllable is to name the whole cycle of the cosmos in a single breath. It opens the Vedas. It opens mantras. It is called the seed from which all other sacred sound grows. In one text, it is the whole of what is worth knowing, the arrow and the target both, the bow being your own self and the mark being the ground of all being. But it does not stop at the borders of Hinduism, and this is where it becomes remarkable. Cross into Buddhism, and there it is again, riding at the front of the most beloved mantra in the world. Om Mani Padme Hum, the jewel in the lotus. Millions of voices across Tibet and beyond have worn that phrase smooth over centuries, and it begins with the same primal syllable, opening the mind the way it always has, a doorway sound placed at the threshold of the sacred. The Buddhist tradition, which famously questions the very idea of a permanent self, still keeps the syllable as the opening note, the sound that clears the space before the meaning enters. Cross again into Jainism, one of the most rigorous and ancient of all the paths, and Om is there too, but decoded differently, unpacked into the initials of the 5 most honored kinds of awakened being, folded into a single sound, so that to chant it is to bow to all of them at once. The same shape, a different key. And into Sikhism, born much later, and at its very foundation, the first mark of its holy book, stands a figure the whole faith turns on. Ikankar, one creative reality, one being, expressed through that same root sound of Omkar, the primal utterance, now bent toward a fierce and beautiful insistence on the oneness of the divine. 4 traditions, often at odds, sometimes across centuries of distance, each reaching for the same handful of sound to open the door to whatever they held most holy. There are many roads leading to the summit, but the view remains the same. That old line could be the motto of this entire chapter. Watch how the traditions decorate the sound differently. Argue about what waits at the top, disagree about the nature of the self and the shape of liberation, and yet reach, again and again, for the identical syllable to begin the climb. Some have even heard its echo further west, in the Amen that closes a Christian prayer, in the Amen of Islam, that low closing hum at the end of the sacred word. Whether by shared root or shared instinct, the human mouth keeps returning to a hummed closing note when it wants to seal a thing as holy. What do you do with this, practically? You let it loosen a particular kind of arrogance. It is very easy, standing inside one tradition, to believe your road is the only road and the summit belongs to you. The spread of this one sound across so many mouths is a quiet argument against that certainty. It suggests that beneath the enormous, real, and sometimes bloody differences between the paths, something was being pointed at that was the same in all of them, and that the pointing was older than any of the names we gave it. You do not have to flatten the traditions into a bland sameness to feel the force of this. The roads are genuinely different. The climbing is genuinely hard. And still, that hum keeps turning up at the trailhead of every single one. Now, all of this talk of primal sound and cosmic vibration invites a hard, skeptical modern question, and we are not going to dodge it. Is any of this true in the way a scientist means true? Is the universe actually vibration, or is that just a lovely poem? Does chanting a syllable actually do anything measurable to a human being, or is it self-hypnosis with incense? Let us take off the robes for a chapter and look with cold eyes, because the honest answer is more interesting than either the believers or the debunkers will tell you. Let us be ruthless for a while. The tradition says the universe is, at bottom, vibration. that reality is nada, sound, that Om is the actual tone of existence. A skeptic hears this and reaches for the word nonsense. So let us do the skeptic the courtesy of taking the claim apart honestly, separating what is metaphor from what is testable, because they are tangled together, and the tangle is where people get fooled in both directions. Start with the grand cosmic claim. Is the universe made of vibration? Here, the honest answer is that the most fundamental physics we have does in fact describe reality at its base not as tiny solid objects but as fields. And the excitations of those fields, the things we call particles, behave in ways best captured by the mathematics of waves and oscillation. In some theoretical frameworks, the most basic entities are literally described as vibrating. Now, and this matters, this is not proof of anything the sages said. The physicist's vibration is a precise mathematical object, not a mystical hum, and to slam them together and cry, "See, the ancients knew," is a cheap move that both sides should be embarrassed by. But the softer statement survives, and it is remarkable enough. The intuition that solidity is not the final truth, that if you go deep enough the world stops being made of things and starts being made of behavior, of pattern, of something more like music than like bricks. That intuition, arrived at by candlelight thousands of years ago, was not stupid. It was in the right neighborhood. Now come down from the cosmos into the body, where the claims get testable and the results are genuinely interesting. Does chanting Om actually do something to a human nervous system? This we can measure, and it has been measured. When a person hums, when they produce that long, low, sustained M, several concrete things happen. The slow, extended exhale of a chant shifts the body toward the calming branch of the nervous system, the part that slows the heart and settles the alarm. The vibration itself, felt in the chest and skull, appears to stimulate the great wandering nerve that runs from the brain through the body and governs how deeply we can rest. Studies putting people in scanners while they chant the syllable have reported quieting in the emotional alarm centers of the brain. None of this requires you to believe a single metaphysical word. The mechanism is boringly physical. A long exhale, a low vibration, a repeated sound, and the animal body climbing down out of its stress and into rest. The ancients did not have the vocabulary of the vagus nerve. They just noticed, across thousands of practitioners and thousands of years, that this particular sound reliably calmed the human creature down, and they built a technology around the observation. Here is where the honesty has to cut both ways. Everything in the world has its own song, and there is truth in that. But there is also a place where the poetry overreaches and starts making promises it cannot keep. When someone tells you that Om vibrates at a specific frequency that matches the frequency of the Earth or the frequency of the universe, and that this is scientific fact, they have wandered out of measurement and into marketing. The pitch at which you chant depends entirely on the size of your own throat. There is no single sacred frequency being measured against the cosmos. That particular claim is a modern decoration, dressed in the borrowed authority of physics, and you should hold onto your wallet when you hear it. So what is left, once we have burned away both the debunker's contempt and the salesman's exaggeration? Quite a lot, and it is the useful part. A slow, low, sustained sound, made deliberately, with attention, reliably calms the nervous system, focuses the scattered mind, and produces a felt state of stillness that is measurable and real. Whether or not the universe is literally humming, you are, and you can change your own state by changing the sound you make. The practice works on the body whether or not you accept a word of the philosophy. That is not a small thing to be able to say about a technique 2,000 years old, which raises a colder, more human question. The one waiting in every gift shop that sells this ancient thing on a shelf next to the scented candles. What happens to a sacred sound when it becomes a product? When the map of consciousness becomes a logo? We have to look at that, because you live in the marketplace, and the marketplace has gotten hold of Om. Walk into almost any store that sells the vaguely spiritual and you will find it. Om on a candle. Om on a water bottle. Om on leggings, on doormats, on phone cases, tattooed on strangers who chose it because it looked serene. The most sacred sound in a civilization, the syllable that 12 verses called sufficient to free a human soul, is now a design element. And this is not a small irony. It is a genuine moral problem. And it is worth sitting inside of rather than rushing past. Because it is really a problem about what happens to anything holy when it meets a market that can sell anything. Start with the case for outrage, because it is strong. To the traditions that hold this sound sacred, seeing it stamped on footwear, on things that touch the ground, on things that touch the body in careless ways, lands as a real desecration. There have been genuine protests when companies printed it on underwear, on toilet seats, on packaging for meat. From inside the tradition, this is not oversensitivity. It is watching the most precious thing you have been given handed around by people who do not know what it is, cannot pronounce it, and would trade it for a phone screen the moment it stopped being fashionable. The word for what stings here is not only disrespect, it is a kind of theft. A thing carried carefully across 100 generations, lifted out of its meaning and sold back to the world as a mood. And yet, hold the other side, because the other side is also true, and the tension between them is the whole lesson. The traditions themselves, from the very beginning, insisted that this sound belongs to everyone, that it is the tone of all existence, present in every throat, owned by no one. A sound that is genuinely universal cannot, by its own logic, be trademarked by a single culture. The moment you say, "This is the sacred syllable of all reality, and only my people may touch it," you have contradicted the claim that made it sacred in the first place. So the appropriation problem has a strange flaw under it. The thing being appropriated was declared, by its own guardians, to be unownable. Where does that leave you, standing in the gift shop with the pendant in your hand? Not with a rule, but with a question about depth. Here is the part they don't tell you about cultural borrowing. The problem was never really the object. The problem is the flattening. When a thing that was a map of consciousness, a technology of liberation, a doorway with 4 rooms behind it, gets reduced to a pleasant shape that means nothing, something has been lost, and everyone loses it. The culture that gave it, and the person who bought it. The tourist who wears the sound as a fashion loses the very thing that made it worth wearing. The desecration that should worry you most is not on the doormat. It is in your own mind, when a thing of vast depth becomes, for you, merely a look. So the practice here is not a policing of who may and may not touch the symbol. It is a private commitment to depth over decoration. If the sound means something to you, then let it mean the whole thing. Learn the 4 rooms. Read the glyph as a map. Chant it with the meaning alive underneath it, the way Patanjali insisted. Let it be, in you, what it was built to be, and you have done more to honor it than any amount of protective outrage. And if it means nothing to you, if it is only a shape you find calming, there is no crime in that either. But be honest that you are holding the empty case and have left the jewel on the shelf. There is an older wisdom hiding in all of this, and it is about you as much as about the symbol. There are many ways to smell like a skunk, and the surest is to carry the appearance of a thing while having none of its substance. To wrap yourself in the marks of depth, the pendant, the tattoo, the tasteful decor, while never once turning the attention inward that the marks were pointing to. The marketplace will happily sell you the costume of transformation forever, precisely because the costume, unlike the transformation, has to be bought again and again. The transformation, once it happens, needs no further purchase. Which brings us to the only thing that was ever going to matter in all of this. Not the symbol on the wall, not the debate about who owns it. The actual practice. The thing you can do Tonight, in the dark, with nothing but your own breath and your own attention, it is time to stop talking about the sound and learn how to make it. Let us get very practical and very quiet. Everything until now has been the map. Here is the walking. This is the practical heart of it. And it is almost embarrassingly simple, which is exactly why people distrust it and keep looking for something more complicated. There is nothing more complicated. The depth is not in the technique. The depth is in the repetition of the simple technique past the point where your restless mind wants to quit. Begin with the body. Sit, or if this is your night to let it carry you towards sleep, lie down and let the practice dissolve into rest. If you are sitting, let the spine be long but not rigid, the shoulders soft, the hands wherever they are comfortable. Close the eyes, and before you make any sound at all, spend a full minute just letting the breath slow down on its own. Do not force it. Simply stop interfering with it and notice that when you stop interfering, it deepens and lengthens by itself. This alone, before a single syllable, is already the practice beginning. You are withdrawing attention from the outer world of the senses, the waking room, and turning it around. Now the sound. Take a slow breath in, and on the out-breath, begin the syllable, and give each of its three parts its full life. Start with the A, low and open, felt in the belly and the chest, the mouth relaxed and wide. Let it be a long, unhurried tone. Then let the sound round forward into the U, the lips gathering, the tone rising into the middle of the chest and the throat, and then close into the M, the lips meeting, and here is the part most people rush and should not. Let the M hum, let it go on. Feel the vibration move up into the bones of the face and the top of the skull, a low buzzing that fills the whole head until the very end of your breath. One full exhale, 3 sounds, poured slowly from the belly to the crown, and then the part that is the actual point and the part everyone skips. When the humming finally runs out of breath, do not immediately breathe in and start again. Stop. Rest in the silence that follows. This is the silence we spent this whole night circling. The gap after the emteria, drawn as a dot. Do not fill it. Do not grab for the next repetition. Just be aware, in the quiet, of the awareness that is still there when the sound is gone. Stay in that gap for as long as it stays comfortable. That silence is not the rest between reps. That silence is the destination, and the chanting exists only to deliver you to it. Then, when the body wants air, breathe in gently and begin again. A, U, M, and the silence. And again. 10 rounds, or 20, or as many as carry you where you are going. As you continue, you will notice the sound getting quieter on its own, the mind less interested in performing it, the silences between growing longer and more alive. Some traditions say to move, over time, from the sound spoken aloud, to the sound whispered, to the sound made only in the mind, to no sound at all, only the meaning, only the silence, the whole practice finally shedding even its own technique. Now, the honest warnings, because a real teacher gives you the failures too. Your mind will wander constantly. You will find yourself 3 sentences into a conversation with someone who is not there, having forgotten the practice entirely. This is not you failing at meditation. This is meditation. The returning is the exercise. Every time you notice you have drifted, and you come back to the sound without scolding yourself, you have done one honest repetition of the only skill that matters. A person who wandered off 200 times and gently returned 200 times had a magnificent practice. The wandering was never the problem. You will also, some nights, feel nothing. No peace, no depth, no silvery silence. Just an itchy body and a bored mind and the suspicion that this is all foolish. Continue anyway. When you tie a horse to a post, do you expect it to grow stronger? The strength does not come from the good nights when it feels wonderful. and you would have sat anyway. It comes from the flat, dull, unrewarding nights when you sat because you said you would, and the mind slowly, invisibly, learned that it does not have to obey every impulse to get up. That is where the change is actually forged, in the sessions that felt like nothing. And do not chase experiences. The mind, hearing about a fourth state and a cosmic silence, will start hunting for fireworks, for visions, for a dramatic dissolving. The hunting itself is the obstacle, because it keeps the grasping self at the center, watching for its prize. The silence is not a spectacle. It is the most ordinary thing there is. So ordinary you have overlooked it your whole life. It arrives when it arrives, not as an explosion, but as a settling, a quiet noticing that underneath all the noise there was always this, and there was never anywhere to get to. Do this, even a little, even badly, even for a few minutes before sleep, and something begins to shift, slowly, under the waterline. And it is toward what that shift leads that we turn now, because there is a strange thing that happens when you finally get quiet enough. The silence, it turns out, is not empty. It answers back. There is a strange discovery waiting for anyone who gets quiet enough for long enough, and almost no one is told about it in advance, so it tends to arrive as a shock. The silence is not empty. You go into it expecting a blank, a void, a pleasant nothing. And what you find, once the noise of the surface mind thins out, is that the silence has a texture, a presence, that there is something there, aware, awake, and it was there the whole time, waiting underneath the racket for you to stop talking long enough to notice it. The old teachers had a blunt little image for a related thing, and it cuts in more than one direction. If you shout into a jug, the jug will shout back at you. At its simplest, it is a warning about the mind. Fill your inner life with noise and agitation are all that will ever echo back to you. Whatever you pour into the silence is what returns. Approach it grasping, hunting for a prize, and you get back only your own grasping. Approach it in a rage, and the rage comes back doubled. The inner silence is a perfect mirror, and most people, the first time they sit with it, are horrified because what comes back at them is the full, unedited noise of their own mind, which they had been successfully drowning out with activity their entire lives. This is why the beginning of real quiet is so often unpleasant, and why so many people conclude that meditation does not work for them and stop. They sat down expecting peace, and instead the jug shouted back everything they had spent decades shouting into it. The unfinished arguments, the old grief, the low constant hum of worry. It was always there. The silence did not create it. The silence merely stopped covering it. And here is the thing that separates the ones who quit from the ones who cross over. The noise that comes back is not a wall. It is the first layer. If you can stay without fighting it, without feeding it, simply letting the echoes rise and fall without grabbing any of them, they begin, gradually, over many sessions, to quiet on their own. And underneath the noise you were making, there was always the presence that was not making any noise at all, the witness, the one who was listening the whole time. To hear yourself, you need days of silence, and this is why. Not because the true self is far away, but because it is quiet, and you are loud, and it takes a long time for a loud creature to get quiet enough to hear a whisper that was never competing for volume. The witness does not shout over your thoughts. It has no need to. It simply waits, present in every state, the silent awareness behind the waking, behind the dreaming, behind the deep sleep. And the entire practice is nothing more than the slow lowering of your own voice until you can finally hear the one that was always underneath. And when you do begin to hear it, when the silence begins, as it were, to answer back, what does it say? Not words. It does not give advice, or predict the future, or whisper secrets. What it offers is stranger, and better than any of that. It offers the direct, wordless recognition that you are not the frightened, grasping, endlessly narrating self you took yourself to be. That underneath that self, holding it up, watching it the whole time, is a vast, calm, unbothered awareness that was never once threatened by any of the things that terrify the surface self. The witness does not solve your problems. It relocates you to the one place in you that never had the problem to begin with. There is a profound relief in this that has to be felt to be believed, and it changes the character of a life. Most of your fear, when you look at it closely, is the fear of the surface self for its own survival, its own image, its own story. And that self is real enough in its way, but it is not the whole of you, and it is not even the deepest part of you. It is the wave, terrified of ending, that has forgotten it is the ocean. To sit in the silence and feel, even for a moment, the awareness that underlies the wave is to loosen the grip of a fear you did not even know was clenched around everything you do. The witness has one more quality worth naming, and it is the one that matters most for how you live. It does not judge. It watches the whole parade of your mind, the noble thoughts and the ugly ones, the fear and the desire and the pettiness and the love, with the same even, silent, accepting presence. It is not on your side against your flaws, and it is not against you either. It simply sees without recoil, and to be seen that way even by yourself, especially by yourself, is a kind of healing that no amount of self-improvement can reach, because self-improvement is the surface self trying to fix the surface self, which is the jug shouting at the jug. The witness offers something the fixing never can. Not a better self, a resting place beneath the whole project of the self, but a resting place found only on the cushion, only in the dark, only in the silence, would be a small thing, a hobby, a private luxury. The whole promise of this teaching is larger than that, and stranger. It claims that this silent witness is not something you visit in meditation and leave behind when you open your eyes. It claims it is with you always, through every ordinary hour, that it was never actually absent, that you carry the fourth room with you into the traffic, and the argument, and the grief, and the joy. So the question that remains, the practical one, is how you carry the silence into the noise. How the thing found in the quiet dark survives contact with a loud, bright day. It is one thing to touch stillness with your eyes closed in a silent room. It is another thing entirely to keep any trace of it while a stranger is screaming at you in traffic, or while the news pours its daily catastrophe into your hands, or in the flat grey middle of an ordinary Tuesday when nothing is wrong and nothing is right and the mind simply grinds. If the fourth room can only be reached on a meditation cushion, then it is a vacation, and you have to keep coming back to the world it let you escape. The teaching claims something far bolder, that the silence is portable, that the witness never left, and the practical work of a lifetime is learning to feel it not instead of your daily life, but underneath it at the same time. Here is the first and most useful move, and you can do it this instant, in the middle of anything. When you are caught, swept up, drowning in a reaction, anger, anxiety, craving, whatever has grabbed you, there is a single question that can loosen the grip. Who is aware of this? Not, how do I stop feeling this, which is more struggling, more shouting into the jug. Simply, who is aware of this feeling right now? And in the very act of asking, something shifts, because to ask it you have to step back one pace, from being the anger to being the one who notices the anger. You do not have to make the feeling go away. You only have to remember that you are the one witnessing it, not the feeling itself. The feeling is weather. You are the sky it is happening in. That one step back is the whole practice. Transplanted out of the quiet room and into the burning moment. This is why the tradition is so relentlessly practical underneath its cosmic language. The point of learning, in stillness, that you are the witness and not the storm, is so that in the storm, you can remember it. The cushion is the rehearsal. The traffic jam is the performance. You practice stepping back into the witness 1,000 times in the safety of the silent dark, so that when the real provocation comes, the muscle is there, and you can find, even for a half second, the still point in the middle of the reaction. Half a second of it, at first, then a second. Then, over years, a steadiness that surprises the people around you, who cannot understand why the thing that would have destroyed you a decade ago now merely moves through you and passes. Notice what this does to your ordinary suffering. Most of what makes a hard moment unbearable is not the moment itself, but the total identification with it, the complete collapse of you into the pain, so that there is no room left, no witness, no sky, only the storm filling the entire horizon. The practice does not remove the storm. It restores the sky. It gives you back the little distance in which a human being can actually live, the gap between the thing that happens and the one to whom it happens. A drowning man will even grab a snake, the old line says, and a mind with no witness, no distance, no still center, will grab at anything at all to escape its pain, and usually grabs the very things that make the pain worse. The still point is what lets you stop grabbing. Not because you have transcended pain, but because you are no longer wholly submerged in it. There is a quieter application too, for the days when nothing dramatic happens at all. Because most of life is not crisis. Most of life is the ordinary middle, the commute, the dishes, the small repeated tasks, and it is here that most people sleepwalk, present in body and entirely absent in mind, the whole day passing through them unwitnessed. The practice offers these grey hours back to you. Any ordinary action, done with the awareness turned on, becomes a place to find the same stillness you find in meditation. The feeling of the water on your hands, the single breath between one task and the next, the awareness, in the middle of the most mundane thing, that you are here, now, aware, and that the aware presence in you is the same one the sages called the fourth. You do not have to add anything to your life to practice this. You only have to be present in the life you already have, which is, it turns out, one of the hardest things a human being can attempt. And slowly, if you keep at it, the line between the practice and the life begins to blur, which is the whole aim. At first, there is meditation, and then there is the rest of your day, two separate territories. But over time, the stillness starts to leak out of the cushion and stain the ordinary hours, until you notice you are carrying a small steadiness with you that was not there before, a slightly larger sky, a witness a little more available, a self that collapses a little less completely into every passing storm. That is not enlightenment. Enlightenment, whatever it is not the point of tonight. That is something humbler and more precious. It is a human being becoming slightly more free, slightly less at the mercy of their own reactions, slightly more present to the single life they were given. And that, spread across a lifetime, changes everything. But underneath all of this practice, all of this carrying and stepping back and returning, there is a final claim we have not yet said plainly, and it is the one everything else has been leaning toward from the very first sound. It is about who you actually are. Underneath the name, underneath the states, underneath even the witness. And that is the last door, the one we opened the syllable to reach. Let us walk through it. There is an old instruction in the tradition that unsettles people the first time they hear it, and then, if they sit with it, becomes one of the most comforting things they know. It says that this syllable is the sound to have in your mouth or in your mind at the moment of death. That whatever a person holds in their awareness as they die shapes where their awareness goes. And that of all the things a human being could be holding at the end, the best is this one syllable, because it is the sound of the source. and to die into it is to die pointed toward home. We flinch from this because we have made death unspeakable, but notice how naturally it belongs to everything we have said. Every night, in deep sleep, you already rehearse a small death. The separate self, with its name and its worries, dissolves completely into the imageless dark, and something in you rests in a peace that has nothing to do with your identity. And then in the morning the self reassembles and you call that waking up. The sages looked at this nightly dissolving and drew the obvious parallel. Death, they said, is that same dissolving, only the self does not reassemble in the morning into the same shape. The wave falls back, and if you have spent your life learning, night after night, breath after breath, to let the sound fade into the silence without panic, to trust that what remains when the self is gone is not nothing but peace, then you have been practicing, all along, for the one letting go that everyone must eventually make. This reframes the entire practice, and it reframes fear itself. There is a text called the Mandukya Upanishad, told as a conversation between a boy and death itself. And in it, death, of all teachers, is the one who explains the deepest things. Death tells the boy about this syllable, and says a line that has echoed for millennia. This sound, he says, is the goal that all the scriptures point toward, the aim of every discipline, the word worth knowing above all others. Whoever knows this sound, truly knows it, obtains whatever they desire. It is the highest support, the strongest ground. Death, the thing we spend our lives fleeing, turns out in this story to be the one pointing at the way through, and the way through is the sound we have been holding all night. Elsewhere, the same body of texts gives an image so precise it stays with you. It says the syllable is the bow, and the self is the arrow, and the ground of all being is the target, and that a person should draw back with full attention and become one with the mark the way an arrow buries itself in its target. Think about what that image is doing. It makes you both the archer and the arrow. The sound is the bow that launches you. And the aim of the whole thing is not to reach some distant heaven, but to sink so completely into the ground of your own awareness that the arrow and the target are no longer two. This is where the mystery begins, at the exact point where the seeker and the sought turn out to be one thing that had briefly forgotten itself. What do you do with this practically tonight, in a life that is nowhere near its end? You do not spend your evenings morbidly contemplating your own death, which is just the anxious self finding a new thing to be anxious about. You do something quieter and more useful. You practice the small letting go every night, in the silence after the sound, and you let it teach your body, below the level of argument, that dissolving is safe. That when the self relaxes its grip, what is underneath is not a void, but a peace. Most human fear, traced to its root, is the fear of exactly this letting go, the terror of the small self at its own ending, and it colors everything, every clinging, every grasping, every desperate reach for control. To practice gently the daily art of letting the sound fade into the silence is to slowly drain the poison out of that root fear. Not by conquering death, which cannot be done, but by making friends, a little at a time, with the letting go that death asks of everyone. There is a strange freedom that comes from this, and it spills back into how you live while you are very much alive. A person who has made some peace with dissolving stops needing to grip life so hard, and paradoxically becomes more able to actually live it. The clutching relaxes. The constant defense of the self loosens. You can afford to be generous, to be present, to love without the frantic edge that comes from unconsciously believing you must extract everything now because it is all slipping away. The one who has touched the silence underneath the self knows that nothing essential is slipping away, that the ground holds, and from that knowing comes a lightness that the grasping life never reaches. Even a dead fish can drift with the current, the old saying goes, and it is a warning that fits here at the threshold. To be carried along, passive asleep, Letting a whole life pass unwitnessed and unexamined requires nothing at all, and it is how most of a life gets spent. To turn and face the current, to become present, to actually inhabit the one existence you were given, and to make some peace with its ending. That takes everything a person has. The syllable is one very old, very tested tool for doing exactly that. A way of turning to face the river instead of merely floating down it toward a falls you refuse to look at. So the last sound is not a morbid thought. It is the whole teaching, standing at the far edge of a life waving you home. And it points directly at the final thing, the plainest thing, the thing we opened the syllable to reach. Not what happens when you die, what you already are, right now, underneath every state, before any name. Let us end there, where we should have begun, with the simplest truth of all. Go back, all the way back, before the person you are now existed, before your name was chosen, before your first memory. There was a moment when you were aware, an infant looking out at a world it could not yet name, with no story about itself, no identity, no idea that it was a separate someone at all, only pure, wordless awareness, taking in light and warmth, and the faces bent over it. That awareness came first. Everything you now think of as yourself, your name, your history, your personality, your fears, your ambitions, all of it was added afterward, painted onto a canvas of bare awareness that was there before the first stroke, and the sages insist will be there after the last one fades. This is the final claim, and it is the whole point of the syllable. So let us say it as plainly as it can be said. Underneath the waking self who acts in the world, underneath the dreaming self who builds worlds behind closed eyes, underneath the sleeping self who dissolves into peace each night, there is a witness. And that witness, the fourth, the silent one, the dot above the crescent, is what you most deeply are. And that witness in you is not a small private thing sealed inside your skull. It is, the tradition claims with total seriousness, identical to the awareness at the root of the entire universe. Atman is Brahman. The silence at the center of you and the silence at the center of everything are one silence, one awareness. That only appeared to be split into a billion separate lookers by the thinnest of veils, the crescent, Maya, the illusion of separateness that the whole practice exists to see through. You are not a separate wave, terrified, briefly raised up out of the ocean and doomed to fall back and vanish. You are the ocean, temporarily shaped into a wave, and the falling back you spend your life dreading is not an ending but a returning. The wave remembering it was never anything other than the sea. This is why the great commentators said that 12 short verses were enough. Because if you truly saw this, if it moved from an idea in your head to a direct recognition in your bones, there would be nothing left to be afraid of, and nothing left to seek. Because the thing you were seeking is the very awareness doing the seeking, and it was never once absent, never once far, never once lost. It was only overlooked, the way you overlook your own eyes while you are busy looking at everything else. And now you can see why this syllable, of all things, was chosen to carry this. Because Om is the whole journey folded into a single breath. You begin with A, the open sound of waking, the world of the senses, the busy outward life. You round into U, the inward turn, the dream, the subtle world behind the eyes. You close into M, the humming dissolution, the return toward the source, the fading of the separate self into peace. And then, in the silence after the sound, you arrive, for an instant, at the fourth, the witness, the self that was never born and does not die. Every time you say the word completely, slowly, with the meaning alive inside it, you are rehearsing, in miniature, the entire arc of a life and a death, and what lies underneath both. You are practicing the one thing that turns out to matter, the letting go of the sound, and the resting in the silence that was always there. So here is what you actually take from all of this, tonight, into your sleep. Not a belief you have to defend, not a new identity as a spiritual person, something simpler and more available than that. The knowledge that there is, in you, a still point that all the noise of your life has been happening around, and that you can turn toward it. And that turning toward it is the oldest practice there is. And it costs nothing, and it is available in the next breath. When you fall asleep tonight, you will pass, as you do every night, from waking into dream, into the deep imageless dark. You have done it thousands of times without a thought. But now you know that this ordinary nightly descent is the same staircase the sages climbed on purpose, and that at the bottom of it, in the silence you never remember, there is a peace that has nothing to do with your name. The soul would have no rainbow if the eyes had never known tears, the old line says, and there is a hard grace in it that belongs here at the end. The whole reason this search begins in most people is suffering. The separate self, the wave that has forgotten the ocean, suffers because it is small and afraid and alone, and it knows it is going to end. And it is exactly that suffering, and nowhere else, that eventually drives a person to ask the question underneath all the other questions. Who am I really? Take away the tears and no one would ever look. The pain of the small self is the thing that finally sends you searching for the large one. Even your suffering in this reading was a doorway, mislabeled as a wall. You came into this with a symbol you thought was decoration. You are leaving with a map of your own depths, drawn in 3 curves, a crescent and a dot. The waking you stand in, the dream you build, the sleep you fall into, the veil that hides the truth in plain sight, and above it all, apart and near, the silent awareness that you have already been. The sound was only ever a way of pointing home, and the home was never anywhere but here, in the one who has been listening this entire time. So we return to where we began, to a sound you have made 1,000 times without hearing it. Only now you know what it was. Not a syllable on a page. A door with 4 rooms behind it, and the last room has no walls. Tonight, when the talking in your head finally quiets and you feel yourself slipping down towards sleep, see if you can catch the edge of it, the waking loosening its grip, the images of the dream beginning to rise. And then the deep dark, the imageless peace, the place you go every night and never remember. You will not stay awake for it. No one does. But you can fall toward it knowing, for once, what it is. You can let the whole self you carry all day dissolve, the way the M dissolves into silence, and trust that what remains when you are gone is not nothing. It is the quiet, unbothered awareness that was here before your name, and will be here after it. The witness at the bottom of the sound. Rest now. Let the paradoxes settle into you while you sleep. Some of what we said tonight will be understood by the part of you still awake, and the rest by the part already dreaming, and maybe a little of it, the deepest part, by the silent one underneath both, who has understood it all along, and was only waiting for you to grow quiet enough to hear. If this gave you something, leave a like and subscribe, so the next long quiet night can be made. And leave a comment with wherever you want to go next, whichever country or corner of thought you want opened slowly in the dark. Until then, breathe out slowly, let the sound fade, and rest in what is left.